I'd expected that she was going to close the door back and attack me, but instead it just waved and walked out of sight down the hallway. I considered running out screaming, but I worried that might provoke the thing inside the young deputy. So instead I kept my back against the far wall of the interrogation room and called Deputy Ellison on my phone. I told him what had happened in a brief whisper, and he said he was on his way. True to his word, less than a minute later he was running into the room. Shutting the door, he looked at me with anxious frustration. "Have you seen her again?" I paused, weighing if this could be another trick, the gravekeeper having taken over Ellison now. But I decided it seemed unlikely and worth the risk to trust Ellison for the moment. I shook my head. No, she just told me about Jarvis disappearing, tricked me into answering a question, and seemed satisfied with that. She left out of here going to the right, and I was scared to follow her. He nodded. I don't blame you. Based on your description, I had the front desk check for any female deputies that left in the last few minutes. Rachel Menas left in a hurry just a minute ago. I told dispatch to get a hold of her, but I don't know how likely that is based on what you're telling me. He sat down at the table with a sigh and gestured to the other chair. Look, I know something messed up is going on, and I'm past thinking it's likely that it's your fault. But you're clearly involved whether you want to be or not. It wants something from you. So if you have any more information, now's the time to give it to me. Sitting down across from him, I recounted the details I had omitted earlier about what had happened at the house, as well as what I had read so far in the letter from the coffin. Ellison listened intently, not speaking after I had been finished for close to a minute. Okay, well, several things. First, you should have told me all this to start with. It might not have helped anything, but it wouldn't have hurt. Second, the way the items were in the coffin makes sense. Or, well, it doesn't make sense, but it's consistent with a theory I had about Jarvis. I frowned at him. What was your theory? He puffed out a long breath. That he didn't escape. That he just went away. I don't really know what that means yet, but I saw no way how he could have gotten out of that room short of teleportation. And I saw no reason why he would leave a souvenir behind either, because Menas wasn't lying about the rock. We found one in a cell, just like you described from the coffin. And then, with me watching it as another deputy went to go get an evidence bag, it just vanished into thin air. Scrubbing his hand through his hair, he went on. The thing is, Menas was never in that cell with him, or with the rock. As far as I know, she wasn't even in the jail section of the sheriff's office. She's a road deputy and had just come back from the end of a shift. I didn't know what to make of that. I'd always assumed that the rock was somehow tied to people getting taken over by the thing, but that seemed unlikely if what he was saying was true. A thought occurred to me. Was she at one of the workers' houses when you were dealing with them? Maybe she got infected there somehow. Ellison shook his head. No, she's a good deputy, but green. Hasn't been on the road 6 months. She was one of the few we kept out on normal patrol while we were dealing with all this other. He tapped the bag containing the letter. You say there's more you haven't read? Yes, I got interrupted by Jarvis at the hospital. I shuddered involuntarily at the memory and tried to push it away. We should finish it and see if it gives us any ideas. Glancing at his cell phone, he pushed the bag to me. Go ahead. Just read it out loud. The first time that we witnessed the strange power dynamic between the gravekeeper and Dr. Middleton was during one of our rare social interactions with the men's ward at Greenheart Home. For various reasons, there was generally strict segregation between the sexes, with separate wings, dining halls, and recreational areas for women and men. For the most part, it was easy to forget that they were even there, and that was typically preferable. The monthly picnic on the vast front lawn of Greenheart was always an ordeal. Some of the women eagerly anticipated the day, putting extra effort into their appearance and making every attempt to garner attention from one or more men during the 3 hours we were together. For me, it amounted to huddling amongst my friends and trying to avoid eye contact with those men that were actively looking for female companionship. While the picnic was supervised, our caretakers were far from assiduous, and I came to understand that they would deliberately turn a blind eye if a couple wandered off into one of the distant stands of trees or bushes closer to the outer perimeter fence. There was no way for them to escape, after all, and if some indiscretion led to a pregnancy, they had means of profiting from that as well. It should be clear that I do not hate men, far from it, but I've never seen much benefit in purely physical congress of that sort, and it wasn't as though I could establish a relationship with someone that I saw briefly once a month. While I pitied their plight as I did my own, I had no desire to be an outlet for some stranger's pent-up lust. So I resigned myself to small conversations with my friends, watching the clouds and reading the latest book I would get out of the lending library. I enjoyed poetry the best, and on this particular day I was reading, funnily enough, Men and Women by Robert Browning. I was thoroughly engrossed, but I looked up when I heard a commotion up near the top of the lawn near the building. "You think you're clever, Doctor?" The gravekeeper's accent was light, but his voice laden with threat as it rolled across the grass. He was talking to Dr. Middleton, who took a step back as he raised his hands. "I don't know what you mean, Meeks." I could hear anger in the man's voice, but it broke as he said the gravekeeper's name. Meeks let out a wet, nasty laugh. "Oh, you know well enough, I think. Yes, I think you do." He took a step toward the doctor, who retreated in kind. "You think I don't know about your little side ventures?" He looked off in the distance for several moments, to the point I thought Dr. Middleton was going to respond, before he was cut off by the gravekeeper's next words. I do. I don't care about the babies, but I do about the trucks, you can. You stop 'em, or I'll stop you." As he said the last, I had the odd image of a hand stopping the pendulum of a clock, killing its motion, its life. I learned later that several of my friends who watched the scene unfold had the exact same image as I. One of the head nurses headed over to the argument, presumably to help the crumbling Dr. Middleton, but the gravekeeper turned his gaze on her, pinning her to the spot. "This little soiree is over, nurse. I want everyone back inside now. Need peace and quiet on my lawn so I can hear myself think." The older woman's mouth moved wordlessly as she turned to glance at the doctor. Even at a distance you could tell by his rounded shoulders and the way he ignored looking at her that he was beaten. Yes, let's cut it short this month. I have too much work to do." Dejected, the nurse turned and started calling for the nurses to collect their charges and return them to their respective chambers in the Green Heart. We gathered up our things and headed for the building, but as we approached the top of the lawn I felt something at my core tremble. I turned and saw the gravekeeper looking at me, his dark eyes steady as the death-watch gaze of a crocodile or an anglerfish, seeing and not seeing at the same time. My heart leapt, and then leapt again when his gaze followed my movements. "What are you looking at, Miguel?" His voice was rough and deep, and at such proximity it took all I had not to run at hearing it. Turning away from him, I lowered my head and murmured, "Nothing." Most of my attention was on keeping my steps measured as I crossed the threshold into the building, on not showing the fear I felt. But then I heard his chuckle behind me as he muttered something low. What I feared then was confirmed over time. I had been somehow marked by the thing we called the gravekeeper. As for his low muttering, it didn't make sense to me when I was at Greenheart, but sitting here in the spring of 1931, I see its significance all too clearly. "That's one, my pet. Yes, I think that's one." I looked up at Ellison. This is the same kind of thing he was saying to me. Or she was, meanest, but you know what I mean. It's something to do with tricking some people into answering him several times. I don't know why it's not like that for everybody, but it can be. From what you're saying, that deputy would have never even seen him." He nodded, his face drawn. "Yeah, no, she wouldn't have ever had a chance to be asked anything by Jarvis. Just keep going. I want to know how we stop this thing, and this is all we have to go on."